Do people realise how hard it is to decide how to start a podcast when we're really anxious?
That can be the start right there.
Exactly, yeah.
Does that mean we've started it?
I don't know.
Okay, yes, we're rolling with it. We've started.
We
We've started. It is incredibly difficult to think of a good opener, especially when you're very anxious, and especially when you struggle with this sort of communication. Like, it's, you know, it's very similar to being on the phone, and that's awful.
Wording is hard.
It is hard. What an incredible few weeks we've had. Just this week, we found out that our podcast has gone international. We do have listeners in Europe, in America. We have some listeners in New Zealand. It's just been fantastic.
It's pretty great. We're now like International Women of Mystery.
I mean,
I don't think there's any mystery here, Tia.
Yes.
The whole point is being open and honest.
We're so anxious, or are we?
Yes, definitely. It's like, in fact, the last few weeks we've been on such a high and things have been going really well. We've been having some meetings, which we can't talk about yet, and everything seems to be falling into place, as it were. And that has made me incredibly anxious. Like, what's gonna go wrong? Why is this going so well?
Well, exactly. Can't have things going right all the time.
I mean,
It's no good for our stress levels.
But seriously, like that is what is ridiculous. My new anxiety is, why is something going well? It's like, I can't even enjoy the fact it's going well. Our listeners are going to be hearing this and thinking, oh my God, they're both in such a great mood. They're giggly and having fun, not realising that we've pretty much just had an awful week. Like, we're both just not okay.
It's really hard not to swear, but we agreed we wouldn't. But I would say it has been not my favourite week.
yeah.
I think that's a fairly good summary without swearing.
But here we are.
And it's Mental Health Awareness Week, so that's amazing.
That's true.
You know, what a time to have a mental health crisis, right?
When everyone's aware of it.
It's wonderful to see so much sort of on social media, and, you know, Instagram's been absolutely alive with the mental health hashtags that were coming out from the Mental Health Foundation and Mind. It you know, it's fantastic to see those. It would be lovely if, you know, you saw it all year round. And I think with all the movements currently going on, we are going to start to see a lot more of this all the time, rather than just at certain points of the year. So that in itself is progress.
Yeah, definitely. This is what we want. We want people to be talking about it. We just hope that people talk about it more regularly and that they feel comfortable talking about it, because I do still think there's some awkwardness there.
Yeah.
One thing I've noticed, because of all these posts in the last week where there's been quite a lot of them to go through, I noticed that a lot of people use the term mental health ever so slightly wrong. For example, sort of talking about, oh, this person suffers with mental health. It's like, no. I understand what you're saying, but we all have mental health, and it goes side by side with our physical health, and there is no overall health without both of those parts working together. It's mental ill health if there is an illness or a condition. But yeah, it's really interesting. We still, I think even I do it on occasion. I just say, oh yeah, I've got mental health. Well, yeah, of course I have mental health. Everyone does. But it's mental ill health. And I've just noticed it. I don't know if you've noticed it. I know that you're not on Facebook, but on sort of the channels you are.
Yeah, no, it is something I've noticed, and something I wasn't aware of until I did the mental health first aid course that you put me onto. But yeah, it's like this stigma as soon as you even hear mental health, not just mental illness. And like, why wouldn't you talk about your health? It's just bizarre. I had someone say to me that they thought it was really brave for doing this and sort of talking so openly about it. And I don't know, I don't like the idea of thinking of it as bravery. I think people speaking up, like, I guess when it's other people, I think they were brave, and I know it's a hard thing to do, but I don't want it to be like that. I want it to be normal.
Yeah, I totally agree. And also it's this, whenever we talk about, you know, say if you're suffering with depression or anxiety, anything, a lot of the time, and I don't know if this is a general thing or just maybe something that I'm used to, I'll say, oh, it's, you know, I'm struggling with my mental health. But if I had a broken leg or something, I wouldn't say I'm struggling with my physical health. I'd say, oh yeah, I've got a broken leg or I've got a cold. So why when someone says to me, oh, you know, what's wrong? And I, rather than say, oh, I've got depression or I'm anxious or this, it's like, oh, it's mental health. Like, actually, it's an actual thing that we should all feel like we can pinpoint it and say exactly what it is. We're trying to help in the fight to end stigma, but we do tend to stigmatize ourselves at times. And I don't know if that comes from still this inherent worry of shame, because of how extensive it's been. I don't know what that is. I don't know if it's been drummed into us through society through the years, but I mean, you've called me out on it several times. You know, you've told me, Hannah, wait a minute, you've just stigmatized yourself, or you've just shamed yourself. And it's really easy to talk to other people about it and say, no, that, you know, that's not okay, do not accept that stigma. But then you just do it to yourself. It's like being able to give really good advice, but you never take it.
I had it, didn't I? When our last episode went out, I kept asking you what the feedback was. I said, I'm just sort of waiting for someone to say something judgmental or feel sorry for me about the self-harm section, and no one did. That was all just me just expecting that and like shaming myself for it. So, but actually, you know, the feedback I had about that section was that it was great, and it really got people thinking about the types of self-harm there could be. So yeah.
So we've discussed the fact that at the point of recording it is Mental Health Awareness Week, but what a lot of people might not have known is the week before was actually Maternal Mental Health Awareness Week. That is all very specific to perinatal mental health. Now, I'll put my hands up. I know very little about perinatal mental health. Tia, do you know anything about it?
So, listeners, I am sat very still because apparently when I move the slightest muscle, there is rustling. Suspect it may be my duvet. I am lying in bed.
Me too.
I've heard of things like postnatal depression, postpartum depression, but perinatal mental health in particular, not really something I've heard of, and definitely not something I know anything about. So I know you've done a lot of research for it. Hannah and I wanted to make really clear that with this episode that because we haven't had much experience of this topic, even with research, we don't want to spend a lot of time talking about something that we're by no means experts on, or even really, as I said, have experience on. So we want a lot of the focus of this episode to be on our wonderful guest speaker. So it's just going to be a brief conversation here about the research we found.
Yeah, I'm in a similar boat to you. I've heard of postpartum depression. That tends to get covered ever so slightly more than, say, other illnesses that fit into this bracket. But generally, I think this is something that isn't really talked about at all unless you are going through it. And from what I've discovered, and what I think our listeners will discover when we talk to our guests, is that it's quite lonely because of the lack of knowledge on it. So just to give our listeners some context, perinatal is anything from the time of becoming pregnant and up to 1 year after giving birth. And perinatal mental health actually includes depression, anxiety, OCD, psychosis, PTSD and can contribute to eating disorders and body image issues. So it actually encompasses nearly all forms of mental health, but with the added sort of level of you're going through quite, a huge hormonal change. And, me and you both know a good deal about mental health, but this was something I knew absolutely nothing about.
I can't believe the length of time that covers, because from my point of view, pregnancy is seen as a very happy occasion, and even though I know a lot of people who have had children, and I think the pregnancy looks exhausting, and that there's, the hormones must be just awful to deal with. I think a lot of the time that's made light of, particularly in TV and films. It's kind of like comical, in my experience, that someone's, like, oh, hormonal pregnant woman, don't wind her up, that kind of thing. And yeah, it's just, I guess we don't hear much about that period affecting people, and on the other side of that, like we said, you hear a lot about when the baby's first born. But did you say that was up to a year after they're born that this can affect people?
Up to a year.
See, that, that's phenomenal, and it's just not something that we really discuss, and definitely needs to be talked about more. Oh, when I was researching this, I saw that it's actually up to 20% of new and expectant mothers experience perinatal mental health issues. That's huge.
That's mind-blowing. That's such a vulnerable time for someone. And, perinatal mental health can affect, the wider family, relationships with any children you already have. And they do think that it can have an effect on your unborn child as well. So it is, if it's not looked after properly, it can be very damaging. So we do need to understand this more. And I'll be honest, when I was reading through all of this, I thought, oh my gosh, like women should be more prepared for this. I've talked to a few of my friends who have had children, and obviously they're all wonderful and beautiful and everything, but no one seems to have gone into it prepared for that side of it. All the physical stuff, yes, but if I got pregnant tomorrow, I wouldn't have known half of this could happen.
I know. I think it's important to say that it's not just going to affect people who have pre-existing mental health conditions. So it might be something completely new. So imagine coming to terms with having mental health issues for the first time while you're pregnant. It can be a really wonderful thing, but it's terrifying.
We're not trying to scare people or trigger anyone. Obviously, what we want to help do is make sure that these conversations are happening and that people are more aware of this. There is great care out there, and we know that it is a wonderful thing, but there are conversations that need to be had to make this an easier process for women and their families. There are people that are challenging, the lack of conversation, the lack of resource. 2021 is actually the 5th year of the Maternal Mental Health Week. It was actually set up by a group of individuals, I think there are 11 of them, and they all have lived experience with perinatal mental health. Interestingly, last year the Duchess of Cambridge actually openly supported it as well, so it is gaining momentum. And I think a couple of years ago they went on to set up the Perinatal Partnership as well. So if anyone's interested in hearing more about that, we will put up the links to it all in our show notes as well.
And what a fantastic organisation. And I was researching them as well, and they have a Letters of Light project, which is basically mothers with lived experience who maybe are in a stage of recovery send letters all across the world to mothers who are experiencing these issues for the first time, just to sort of offer them a source of hope and to say that you're not alone and you can get through this, which is obviously what we're trying to do with mental health in a wider sense here.
Yeah, and I don't think this is going to be our only episode on perinatal mental health. We've had quite a lot of people reach out to us on this particular subject, so I think it's going to come up a few times. Again, we'll put all the information for the Letters of Light scheme and all of that on our show notes, which appear on our website, on the Acast app, and on our social media pages as well. So you can find all that information directly from those pages.
The only other thing I wanted to just talk about was sort of in relation to this topic. I had a wonderful newsletter from probably my favourite podcaster, no offence to us.
I am deeply offended.
A wonderful lady called Claire Tonti, who did a podcast called Just Make the Thing, and now does a podcast called Suggestible with her husband, an excellent podcaster too, by the way. So yeah, her newsletter was celebrating Mother's Day because it was Mother's Day internationally, and she was talking all about matrescence, which I hadn't heard of as a word. Not sure if you had.
No.
It's basically the change a woman's body goes through when they become pregnant and have children, and it's like adolescence, similar sort of word. And it's basically just about the physical changes your body goes through and those hormonal changes, and how your hair and skin change, and how it's basically like adolescence, a whole stage of development in your life, and how people just don't talk about it like that and really allow for that massive change in your body, how awkward it can be, how you almost come out of it as a different person, much like I guess you do from adolescence to adulthood. She was just talking about how great it would be if we could make more allowances for that, and as we were saying earlier, not just expecting women who are pregnant to be overjoyed that they are, and allowing for the changes that they're going through.
Yeah, and allowing them to be uncomfortable, allowing them to not enjoy every single moment of it, like letting women go through it in their own way and not having pressure on them.
Claire said in a newsletter, the pressure women put on themselves to regain or to get back to the body they had pre-pregnancy when they've literally grown a human being inside of them. How ridiculous. Of course it's not going to be the same, and that's okay.
If you want to eat a 4-pack of scones from Sainsbury's, eat the 4-pack of scones from Sainsbury's. You have just given birth to a baby, to life.
I have not given birth to life, but may I also eat the 4 packs of scones? So I'll also accept Tesco, Asda, Morrison's. Not fussy about where the scones come from.
I just particularly like Sainsbury's cherry scones. They use glacé cherries, and they're really nice.
Island Mind, sponsored by Sainsbury's scones. Just to be clear, we are not sponsored by Sainsbury's or their scones.
We are sponsored by nobody, and that's why we're doing this in our bedroom.
We are going to welcome this month's guest next. Now, this episode deals with a particularly difficult experience with the healthcare services. We would like to stress that this is not reflective of all our healthcare services. Hello, Alana. Thank you so much for joining us. Perinatal mental health is something that both Tia and I have no experience with at all. So I'm going to give you the microphone, as it were, and just be guided by you. So whenever you're ready, if you would like to start sharing your experience, I'm sure a lot of our listeners are going to get a lot from this.
Okay, yeah, that's great. It's something that's really important to me that it gets spoken about, because my main experience has been that whenever I've had a problem or I've been worried, I have found I've found support in the wrong places, and a lot of the support, quote unquote, that I have found has been not necessarily very positive. So I think that's fed a lot into the issues that I've been having. And so I think it's really important to be honest. I don't think enough mothers are, whether that be because they feel shame or stigma, or whether they just don't want to acknowledge the way they've been feeling. That I found very unhelpful because I didn't find anyone I could relate to. So yeah, I really hope that someone listens to this and it helps them.
I hope there will be a lot of listeners that can either relate, or they've had a similar experience, or it might be that some people find some reassurance, or they actually learn, what to do. I think it's great that you're talking about it. We say this every week, but it takes a lot of courage to talk about these things, and probably more so when it comes to children as well.
I think it's really important to say my experience is coming from a place of I wanted the baby, and it may be different for someone who perhaps had an unplanned pregnancy and coming from a different situation. So everyone's experience is individual. Ours was very much we want to have a baby at some point. The timing was not ideal, but it wasn't the end of the world. When I found out I was pregnant, I was like, well, we're doing it. We're having the baby. Both me and my husband want this baby very much. The only reason the timing wasn't ideal was because obviously pandemic, and we both worked for the NHS. So it was it wasn't ideal to be pregnant, because I did all the way up through my pregnancy work a lot of overtime. And I am a frontline worker. I work in radiology. So I was very much hands-on dealing with the virus. And we didn't know how the antenatal care was going to be, but we thought, well, we want the baby, so we're going to go ahead with it. And I was really happy, but I didn't have the feelings I expected to have initially. I had a bit of excitement. I was like, oh, I'm pregnant and all of that. And I told very few people at first, because obviously a lot of people wait till the 12-week scan for own personal reasons. I didn't want too much fuss while we worked out how things were going to be. And I had a lot of anxiety around if the baby was going to be healthy. And so I think, and I don't know how many mums will relate, but I definitely had the feeling of not feeling connected to the pregnancy, almost separate from it, until I had my 12-week scan. And I don't know how much of that was self-preservation, if I'm honest, because I didn't know how I would handle the news if I couldn't keep the baby. So there was a lot of anxiety in the beginning. And I think looking back, the point that I'm at now has been slowly building, but I didn't recognize it in myself. It's important to say I do have some mental health problems. I've never had a full diagnosis or assessment from anybody. I live in West Sussex in the Chichester area, and the clinic that I get referred to, I don't have great feelings about, but it's the only one available. And I've been in and out of that service more times than I can count, but no one has ever followed through and given me a proper diagnosis or even had any therapy. Most of the time I'm given medication and told to go away, basically. So I have no idea what box I tick, but I have very generalized anxiety and depression. I've had a lot of friends who have had babies, and a couple of them have had quite severe postnatal depression. So I've always known and been very hyper aware of what to look for in depression, so much so that I didn't expect to get anxiety. That one hit me. I didn't even realise that perinatal anxiety was a thing until it happened, because I was so focused on depression. Yeah, initially I didn't feel connected to the pregnancy, and the seeds of the anxiety started then, because I started feeling bad about the fact that I didn't feel happy. Well, I felt happy, but I didn't feel the way I thought other mums would feel about being pregnant. And that carried on. I also didn't have a very easy pregnancy. I didn't have any major issues, but I was very sick and I was in a lot of pain, and I did not enjoy being pregnant. And there was a lot of anxiety and guilt around that as well. So quite often, I think the main question I would get asked was, oh, how are you feeling? How are you doing today? And I would be honest, and I would say, actually, I don't like being pregnant. And as soon as I was honest, people didn't want to know anymore. They kind of did. They wanted either the niceness. They wanted me to go, oh yeah, I love it. Like, I feel my tummy and all of that. And I didn't want that. I didn't want to be touched. I genuinely didn't like being pregnant. And I wanted to say, someone to go, oh, it's okay. We can talk about it. And no one wanted to know. They would go, oh, it will pass, or it gets better. Those were the nice ones. But we had just enjoy every moment was one I kept getting, which I'm sure came from a place of wanting to relate and be kind, but I couldn't enjoy every moment, and I didn't. So that sowed the seeds of feeling guilty that I wasn't grateful for being sick, really. And it was bad. My shifts are pretty long. I work 7:30 till 6. Or if I'm doing an X-ray shift, I work 1 in the afternoon till 9 at night. These hours were extended during the pandemic. So at one point I was doing 7:30 in the morning till 9 at night. And I cannulate. I work in CT, so I've got constant patients up and down, walking on my feet. So I was throwing up quite a bit, and I felt nauseous a lot and very faint. And that didn't really go away. First trimester sucked completely, and I didn't feel very much into my pregnancy. I didn't have a good experience with my midwives, both of them. I changed. And because I don't know how much the pandemic has affected services, or if how many women listening to this are going to have experienced the same thing, I do want to just take time that whatever I say in this interview, I don't want it to colour someone's experience and make people worried that they're going to have the same experience. You might not. This has just been my experience of the antenatal care in this area. It's not been great. The pandemic probably has a lot to do with it, but I do really feel like I've missed out on a standard of care that I would expect as a healthcare worker. Everything mostly was done over the phone. There were very few face-to-face appointments, and that was a big problem for me. When I first spoke to my midwife on the phone, we had a chat for about an hour, which is called like the booking appointment. And they run through a lot of questions about your health, and mental health does come up, but I don't think it was a very in-depth question. But I would also like to say that I think I influenced the care that I got, because I felt like I had to downplay my mental health history, because I was very scared that social services might get involved and think that I wasn't able to look after my child or suitable if they deemed me to be too mentally unwell. So I did tell them about my history of depression. They ask you if you've ever been on any medication or had any history of depression, because it makes you, in their eyes, more at risk of postnatal depression. And I noticed that they never talk about anxiety, actually, in the booking appointment. In hindsight, I remember all the questions were all about depression, which is probably why my anxiety came as such a shock when it happened. They ask you all about that, so that they can sort of grade you, much like if you've ever had a mental health assessment and you get the 1 to 10 scale. They do a similar thing. And I told them that I'd had history and I used to be on medication, but I've not been on it for 5 years. And at that point, she just kind of moved on really quickly. And she said, well, I don't think you're at high risk then, which was good to me. I also didn't think I was high risk, to be fair, and I didn't want to be seen as high risk. So I wonder if I could have been more open, and whether that would have affected the care that I got. Who knows?
But what is wonderful is obviously now you are talking about it, and it will make a difference to other people. Not saying that, you know, I want you to have gone through this. Of course not. I wish you didn't have to. But I think it's really good that you're using your experience and your voice to help other people.
Yeah, I hope that it does help. Picking it apart in my head is helping me as well, because there's a lot I haven't told many people. I don't think many people I know actually think that I was going through this, because I was very good at hiding it. It was difficult. I feel like I missed out on a lot. And I remember telling my midwife on my very first appointment, where it was face to face and she would do my first measurements, it was just before my 12-week scan. I felt very rushed when I got there, and I think maybe that's her caseload as well, because obviously social distancing. And I'd just like to point out as well, it's obviously really difficult for healthcare workers as well, and I don't think a lot of them want to be in the position that they're in. So what I'm talking about is no way really a criticism. It's just the experiences I felt and how I felt about it. I do feel like the 2 healthcare workers I had could have been better. That might just be because they weren't suited to me, and they probably are fine to work with other people. So I will say, if you ever feel like you don't quite gel with your midwife, definitely change. I should have done it a lot sooner with mine, and I left it, and that was a mistake on my part, because I could have had a lot better care, and I would have felt a lot more able to talk about the way I was feeling with somebody else. But I left it because I thought, oh well, pandemic, it's not easy to get someone, I'm just going to roll with it. I didn't want to make a fuss. I didn't want to make it harder for anybody. So I kind of put myself at a disadvantage there, I think. But the booking appointment was really bad. I remember going there, and I didn't know why I felt the way I did. I felt really down and tearful, and I couldn't quite I didn't understand why. It was probably hormones, a lot of it. I started to tell my midwife how I was feeling, and she sort of just looked at me deadpan, I think is the best way I can describe it. She was like, oh, okay. And I said, I just feel really low. I'm really worried that I'm not having the experience other women are having. I feel like I'm not getting to meet other mums. And I would ask her lots of questions. One of the things I remember asking was like, I was getting really excited. It's like, oh, me and my husband, we've been looking at breast pumps because I wanted at the time to breastfeed. And we were wondering if you had any recommendations about the best kind, because I'm kind of feeling overwhelmed by the information on the internet. And she said, oh, we don't need to think about that till 36 weeks. And I was like, okay, but I wanted to discuss it. And I thought the idea of having a midwife was that you could talk about all these things with them and get their advice.
Yeah.
I really felt like she didn't want to give me the time. And it might have been that she didn't have the time, but it wasn't what I was expecting. So I felt less able to open up. And then I explained that, because of pandemic, there's no antenatal classes, there's no meetings that I could go to learn how to be a mum. I am a first time mum. And she said, we don't really run those till 36 weeks anyway. It is a rubbish time, but I wouldn't worry too much about it. There's the internet. Go on Family Assist. Have you been on Family Assist, which is the local government's website for these sorts of things? And I felt like that was the go-to thing I was always told whenever I needed help. And I've got to be honest, it's not the best. I've compared the NHS website to Family Assist, and they have literally copy and pasted the bare minimum of the NHS website. So it's not like this fountain of knowledge that could replace a midwife's knowledge. So I felt a bit brushed off. And as I was telling her this, I was starting to cry, but like involuntarily, I didn't realize I was crying. And I said, I don't know why I'm crying. This is very embarrassing. She's like, is this normal for you? And I was like, in the last week or so, yeah, I've been crying quite a bit, but sure, mums do, don't they? I said, it's probably normal. She's like, not normal if you're doing it every day. So she kind of sowed those seeds in my head that there was something really wrong. Then she said, and how have we discussed your mental health? And is it your first baby? She said quite a lot. And I said, yeah, it is my first. And in my mind, I was thinking, but also we've discussed this in my booking appointment. Do you remember anything about me? It felt very impersonal, which made my anxiety worse. And that sort of language carried on in our appointments. And sadly, after that discussion, is this your first? It's not normal for you to be crying like this. She then moved on really quickly to, let's look at your baby's heartbeat. And because I was so upset, I didn't take in that moment. I didn't record it for my husband. I didn't enjoy hearing my daughter's heartbeat for the first time, and that was awful. And the other thing she said that I hope I don't upset any women listening. I had a real fixation and of thoughts in the first couple of weeks of my pregnancy that upset me, actually, that I felt I wouldn't bond with my baby if I found out it was a boy. And I literally tortured myself with those thoughts over and over again. I'm really worried I won't bond with it if it's a boy. I've always seen in my head, when I've imagined having a baby, my first child being a girl, and I didn't know how I'd feel about having a boy, and I felt awful about that, because it doesn't matter. All I really want is a healthy baby, but I was like, I don't know if I'll love it if it's a boy. And I asked my midwife, I was like, I'm having these feelings and they're really upsetting. Is this normal? Like, will I? And she's like, it won't matter what you have, you'll grow to love it. And I was like, I know that, but the way that she said it, and I don't know if maybe I pinched a raw nerve for her when I said it, but it made those thoughts worse, and I felt ashamed for them. And it went away pretty quickly, but it was these cycling of thoughts you often get, and I had a few like that. I don't know if I'm going to bond with the baby if it's a boy. I had, what am I going to do if there's a severe illness with the baby? I don't know that I can cope with that as a mother. Like, how will people think about me if I decide to terminate? What will my husband think? Is my relationship going to end if there's a problem? Like, these thoughts went round and round and round and round, and I drove myself nuts. But I managed in my work to bury them away, and then they got better. So pregnancy, after a while, that all of the anxiety did sort of go. I could have done better. I could have told the midwife, but at that point I hadn't built that rapport with her. So I didn't want to tell her. And whenever I did open up to her, I found her emotionally cold. I thought that might be something that I was told, is that if you have a problem with your midwife and you want to change, this is the process. I wasn't given that process. There are a lot of things I wasn't given, I have to say. So yeah, that experience was bad. And that carried on up till week 25. So I got to change midwives, but then I only saw my new community midwife once before I gave birth. I had one appointment with her, and that was it. I had next to no antenatal care, apart from I saw the first midwife about 3 times. I got to go to my scans. I am lucky. I am one of the women who did get to take her husband to the 2 important scans, so the 12-week and 20-week. But he wasn't allowed to come to any of the midwife appointments where I could have really done with him. So that was quite horrible. That thought in my mind that something could be wrong and he wouldn't be there. and it affected him as well. It was not great. So that was the antenatal experience.
So a lot of what you've said is there are feelings of guilt and shame because you felt like you weren't feeling how a mother should feel. That's okay. Like, your feelings are completely valid. And I know you're not the only person out there that has probably gone through that. I know my mum, but she was worried about not having a bond with me throughout the pregnancy. She wasn't a maternal person. I have friends with children who weren't maternal and were worried about things like that. But obviously it was okay. But that doesn't mean the feelings weren't valid at the time. And I
really wanted someone to sit with me and talk through that, or refer me to someone that I could talk to with that, and I didn't get that at all. I kind of just got told to enjoy my pregnancy.
God, it's exactly the same though as all the other silly comments you get when it comes to mental health, like, oh, be grateful for what you've got. No. Like, stop it. Like, that, you're not being ungrateful for what you've got, but mental health is an illness. And on top of already being ill, you've got hormones doing all sorts, your body is going through changes. Your first time, it's all a brand new experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also found that a lot of people would say to me, why don't you reach out on Facebook and discuss your pregnancy? Why don't you just talk to other people? And I think I kind of felt I didn't want to, because I had watched the way other people interact with other mums for a while, especially my friends. I didn't like the way people would just go offer advice unsolicited. I tended to find that unhelpful as well. I remember once I had posted a picture with my bump, and it was the first time I'd shared a picture of my bump. I had never really shown a picture of it. It was my week, around week 20, and I thought, I've got a slight bump now. And someone said to me, make sure you use olive oil on your stretch marks. And at one point I was like, I don't even have stretch marks yet, but I didn't invite a comment on my body. It was just I was sharing my bump picture, but I wasn't really inviting for any comments on my actual body. Nor was I talking about stretch marks, and it didn't feel relevant, and it made me really angry. And at that point I just thought, you know what, I don't actually want to share anymore. And that made me sad, because at the time of the pandemic my family couldn't see me, but they missed out on that because I didn't want to post, because I didn't want any opinions or advice on feeding. I didn't want to get into an argument. I didn't want to tell people what my plans were. And I think a lot of women might feel the same way, and then you kind of isolate yourself because you don't seek the support that way, and you go down the dark hole of the internet. And if I can give some unsolicited advice, having just mentioned that I hate unsolicited advice, stay away from the internet. Stay away from Mumsnet. Definitely stay away from Mumsnet.
Good to know.
Looking for help, reading through hot threads, what I found, especially when I was in the depths of my breastfeeding crisis that I had, was people telling other women that they hadn't tried hard enough, that breast was best, and that the fact their latch mustn't be right. Had they got checked? Did they do enough? Have they done X, Y, Z? When the mother literally in her post has listed everything that she's done, oftentimes what has been suggested, and is at wit's end because their baby just won't feed. And it isn't, as I've discovered, for everybody at all. It doesn't matter how much support you had, because I did get a lot of support with breastfeeding, I will say, when I was on the labour ward, by some very, very, very well-trained women, very good. And they told me that the problem I was having with Lyra was not the latch. She was perfect latch. I was very lucky. She knew what to do. I had the milk, but she didn't want to work for it. She is lazy, they said, and I would tend to agree. And at the time when my colostrum was coming in, it's very hard work for a baby. They have everything they need in these tiny little drops, but it doesn't come out easy. And so she's having to suck, and she just goes, do you know what? No, I know that I've had a bottle of formula because you topped me up, and that's easy, and I'm going to have that again. I had these excellent women who checked my latch, checked my positioning, and off I went on my way. I tried everything they told me. There wasn't a lot that I didn't try. And so reading that, I was like, I felt for these mums. I was like, actually, we did. And you're saying we didn't. And then there's a lot of mum shaming, and just stay away from that, because that's not going to help your mental health. And I knew that in my logical mind. I'd heard about this, and I still went there, and I still looked.
Some people, when they're trying to give advice, got good intentions, but all they ultimately do is project their own experience onto someone else, and it's not one size fits all. This all happens very differently for everyone. And then you do have people that just lack any form of mindfulness at all, and unfortunately it's so easy for them to have a voice on the internet. Mum shaming or anything like that is awful, because everyone that has a child starts somewhere. Like, it will always be the first time. You've done everything right, you know, you found your way, but it won't be the same journey that somebody else has had, but that doesn't mean it's wrong. I mean, it sounds like you've done incredible considering everything you've been up against as well. The antenatal side of it sounds like that in itself was quite traumatic.
It was, and I think it is due to the pandemic. I will not say that it's impossible to have negative experiences outside of it, but I definitely feel that my experience was molded by the way the services had to kind of restrict. But I felt I would be less anxious about a lot of the things I've become anxious about had I been able to go to all the classes and have more in-depth care from the midwives, that they weren't able to provide that. And I will never blame them for that situation. But I do feel that the two that I had could have handled the situation better. Or with mental health. Because it wasn't really a mental health issue at the start, but it has now become. And so I realised really quickly that I had antenatal anxiety, or perinatal anxiety, I should say, sorry. I noticed that I had that pretty much in the first 24 hours of having my baby. And I'm self-aware enough to realise what it was, that it was anxiety and not depression. And I was really clear about that, because I was so hyper-focused on not getting depression. And I knew that I wanted my baby. Like, the distinguishing feeling that I had was that I wasn't feeling hopeless. I wasn't feeling like I wanted to hurt myself or her. My feelings were, what if I hurt her? Is she okay? Like, am I doing this right? Am I doing it well enough? It was the question was always about whether I was doing the right thing for her, and not, do I love my baby? I knew that the problem was, in fact, actually, I felt I loved her too much. I felt that I was, in essence, being what I would call a helicopter mother before I'd even got to know her. I was very hyper aware. And I also think, as a healthcare worker, having to that overnight stay at the hospital was the worst thing for me, because I was hearing all the alarms, the patient alarms, and my work brain was telling me that I needed to go and see the patient. But I was the patient, and I couldn't even have done anything on that ward anyway, because that's not my department. But I had my work brain going off, and then I was trying to get to grips with my new identity as a mother, and that was a very, very surreal experience and very unique. Don't recommend. There was also the fact that I had 36 hours. I'd been going for 36 hours without sleep at that point, so I had a very long labour. I mean, I know they count labour in the hospital as the 3 hours that you're from 5 centimetres dilated onwards, but for me, labour was all day long. The way I would describe my mental health difficulties would be extreme anxiety, but I also believe I've got ADHD, and I've had that obviously since I was a child, but no one's ever picked it up. I get sensory overload. I get very overwhelmed by noise and touch, and so I'd put myself into sensory overload from the pain of giving birth, because it is like I will never be able to describe what it feels like. It is, when people say it is the worst pain you will ever feel, I can now say that's true, and it's not easy to describe, because it is so unique. It is something you kind of have to experience to get. That I was just overwhelmed with that, and I remember I kind of went into what I call a dissociative state, where I'm in the room but I'm not present, and I wasn't very responsive, and they were worried that I'd gone into shock or bled too much with the way that I was reacting, but I was just laying there. I wanted my daughter, and I was aware of her on me, but I wasn't really otherwise doing much else other than holding her, and they were very concerned. And about 10 minutes after that, the first breastfeeding support woman comes in, grabs my daughter, and is trying to teach me how to get her to latch, trying to get me to get her to latch. And I wasn't quite getting it. And so she was trying to show me another, like 2 or 3 different ways. And I just had to say, look, I really want to breastfeed, but right now this is not the time for me to be learning to do this. But I know that she has to feed. So can actually my husband have a bottle of formula and just feed her? And it wasn't until I said, look, I think I've got undiagnosed ADHD. I have sensory overload. And they were good. They did actually, once I said that, they were good. But I was overwhelmed, and I didn't expect to feel overwhelmed like that. And I didn't get time to process my birth. One of the reasons I wanted to talk about this was I don't think I've actually processed it properly, even now, and how all the ways that I was feeling about it. Yeah, I felt very overwhelmed by that. And a lot of the medical conversations that were happening around me were concerning as well. One of the things I remember was when Lyra was born, when she came out, obviously they rubbed the baby over, like near you, to get them to breathe. And it was Drew, my husband, has told me it's probably only about 5-10 seconds, if that she wasn't breathing and crying, but it felt like eternity to me. And I was very vaguely aware of someone talking about resuscitation. What they'd actually meant was me. There was a brief moment of time that my husband has told me that they thought I bled too much and I might have to go to theatre. But I heard the word resus and freaked out that my daughter wasn't breathing and crying and thought she was dead. And so those thoughts, they started from that really early moment, and they spiraled and got worse throughout the time that I was there.
Has the postnatal care been any better, more present than it was prior to your face is telling me no, but
yes and no.
Okay.
So when I identified that I was having anxiety, I had to go back to the hospital after I was discharged because I insisted on going home, but they hadn't been able to do Lyra's 24-hour checks because there was no doctor around. They were very busy. So I said, I'll come back to the hospital the next morning. We did her checks, and then I had to go speak to a midwife, and she asked how I was feeling post the birth. And I was honest in that moment. I said, I actually think I need to talk to someone to process what's happened to me in this birth experience. I was shocked to feel traumatized by it. Because I had had what you would imagine, what most women would class to be a normal birth. I didn't have to go to have an emergency C-section. Lyra was fine. So there was no reason for me I thought, to feel traumatized, and yet I did. And the midwife I spoke to was very lovely. And she said, okay, I think we can do like a referral to Time to Talk. She might have not have known about all the options. She's like, I think we can do this. Who's your normal community midwife? And I gave the name, and she said, right, I will speak to her, and when she sees you tomorrow, you can have the referral. They asked me if I'd used Time to Talk before, which is our local talking service. I said I had many times. I didn't find them helpful prior, but for this situation, I was open to try it because it might be different. I was like, yeah, sure, I will do whatever it takes to make me feel better. And my midwife did make the referral, and she said, right, well, we'll wait for that to come through. Here's where it got really bad. So in that time, the anxiety got worse, but I was feeling okay. I was like, right, I can hold on. I'm going to have this referral. It's going to get better. I'd had my 10-day check with my midwife, and I'd said, oh, the referral hasn't come through yet, but I know it takes time. She was happy to discharge me from her care. And I was happy to be discharged from her care because everything with Lyra, and at the time I thought breastfeeding was going well. So I was like, yeah, fine. I will wait for this referral. I'd got a letter in the post from Time to Talk. And on this letter, it said, we regret to inform you that we don't feel we can take your case on as you have a diagnosis of borderline personality disorder, which was a shock to me because I've never had any diagnosis from anybody at all. And I was sat reading it in disbelief. I was like, I do not have borderline personality disorder. I would know if I had this. So this is a shock. There was no mention of a referral anywhere else or any advice. I ended up phoning the GP and asking them to see if they could look on my medical records that they have access to and see if there was a diagnosis that I did not know about on there. And they don't have it. They have a letter on their system, which I knew about. So the last time that I saw any kind of mental health help was at my previous job. I did a very different job to what I do now. And I had a mental breakdown there because I couldn't cope with the workload. What I was expected to do was very stressful, and there was a lot of it, and I was not able to manage it. And that's when I started to realize the things about me that make me think I may have ADHD. And I went off sick, and I asked the GP if I could be referred for an assessment for ADHD. And I had to go to this mental health clinic in question that I've talked about. And I got to speak to a psychiatrist there for, the basic triage, like, this is what we're going to do. And she didn't, I took loads of evidence. I compiled evidence from my mum, evidence from my friends, and everything that I thought I had I took a lot with me. She didn't even look at the evidence I took with me. She listened to me talk. She heard me talk about the childhood trauma that I had. And as soon as I said that, she homed in on borderline personality disorder. Because I said I'd had emotional instability as a child growing up and had until recently still had that, she took that and said, no, this is what you have, and I'm not willing to explore any other possibility. I will do an assessment with you for borderline personality disorder. And I disagreed with that. And I said, I do not want to waste your time and resources, because the only box I tick is this. And prior times I've spoken to other people, although we've never had an assessment, they have said you don't quite tick enough boxes for borderline personality disorder. So no one can agree. I don't think I've got that. The letter said pretty much that. She had an opinion, I disagreed, and we didn't have a diagnosis. And she was stressed in the letter, there is not a diagnosis. Time to talk, I've got hold of that letter and run with it. So I've been left until now, I have been left with no support for that anxiety. I didn't see the health visitor until 2 weeks after I got that letter. And then my health visitor, who is fantastic, like she's been brilliant for everything, she said, and how is your mental health? And she said, and what's been happening with your time to talk referral? And I just handed her the letter, and she took one look at it, and she just said, but why were you referred to time to talk? And I said, well, what do you mean? She's like, you should have been referred to the perinatal team. So this is the first I hear of the perinatal team. And I heard back in 2 days. I was not told about the correct place to go. I think it speaks volumes. I remember I've recently had, in the last week, my first triage over Zoom appointment with the perinatal team. And so going forward, what they're going to do is they're going to take me onto the caseload, and I will meet with the person I'm seeing every fortnight. But she has also said one of the things they can offer is actually do a proper assessment. So the way that she said it is a medical review, but she explained that one of the things they might offer from that is a mental health assessment. So I may finally find out what in the vast melting pot of mental health disorders is wrong with me off the bat of this. And she said, it will take a while, you might hear by the end of the month. And I said, actually, that's good. And I think it says a lot that, like, I was like, oh, that's good, that it will literally take me only 3 weeks. Because I so innately know the mental health system. And I think the longest I've ever waited for any kind of even to see someone after referral was a year. So, yeah, it says a lot, doesn't it, about the funding?
Yeah, it does. And, maybe one of the silver linings of the pandemic is that people are now talking more, and there seems to be a lot more going into bringing mental health into the media, but it's a pandemic in itself, to be honest.
Yeah, absolutely is.
There might be some women listening and now they're like, oh no, oh God. But I think what people need to take away from this is that being honest is really important. And if you're not getting the help you need to be really vocal about it. There are certain things you've said that do reassure me. I mean, I'm not particularly maternal. Before I met my current partner, I didn't really want children. Now I do. But I do worry about things like not having a bond. I'm very lucky. People like yourself, friends, family, they're saying that's okay. And I wish more people knew that that's all that it actually takes, is just someone being a bit mindful, not trying to project their own issues on you or their own opinions, and just saying, that's fine.
Yeah. I think that's what you need, and what I wish I'd had. And maybe, I mean, hindsight's 2020, isn't it? I think if I kind of allowed my brain to isolate itself in a way, but I was so afraid of unsolicited advice, I didn't reach out.
Yeah.
And I think if I had had a mum that I trusted my age, in my situation, you'd sat down and gone, look, this is how I felt. These are all the horrible things I felt, not just all the nice things, because that's all you hear about. Is that you see all the beautiful pictures of pregnancy, you see the ideal, don't you? You don't see all the bad things. I don't see how it's possible to love every moment of something that is so drastically changing your body, the things that your body does. it's a lot to adjust to, and it's a lot to learn to love.
Yeah.
And I'm still recovering, actually, mentally and physically. There are things that no one tells you about having a baby. I wish someone had sat down and told me. Second piece of unsolicited advice: don't break in Dr. Martens when you're pregnant. I couldn't fit my shoes. I had one pair of shoes that fit, and that will take up to 9 months to go back to the way it was. So you've got to be kind to yourself, and I'm preaching to the choir because I am still struggling with this. But you do have to be kind, because your body will not be the same. So you need to be prepared for that. It may not go back to the way it was, but it's okay. There are clothes that fit me before I was pregnant that don't fit me now, and it's nothing to do with the weight. My shape has just changed. Obviously, the anxiety is fueled by your instinct, and that can be really hard to unpick as well. Sometimes it can be hard to know where the line is, but try to listen to yourself. And if you are finding yourself obsessing over it, you have to try and take a step back, because you will drive yourself up the wall, which is where I'm at now. So it's important to talk about how you're feeling. I think that's why honesty is important, because otherwise you end up in these cycles, and it's not a good place to be at all.
No. And it's a shame that people feel like they can't be honest for all the reasons we've discussed together, sort of guilt, shame, worrying about social services, or worrying that people are going to project onto you, give you unsolicited advice and criticism, actually, in some instances. It is a shame, but I'm hoping that obviously the more and more people do talk, maybe more people will be more mindful and a bit more careful about the way they talk to other people.
Yeah, that's my hope too. Pregnancy
is such a personal thing. Millions of women go through it. It's not the same, is it, for everyone? And that's okay. There's a lot of expectations as well, isn't there, on who you should be as a woman, as a mother, as a pregnant woman. And actually, those expectations need to be
just get rid of them.
And it's your journey. You learn on the way, and that's okay. And it's just a shame that you didn't get to experience it in that way. But Lyra has a kick-ass mother.
Oh, thank you.
It is super brave to talk about these things. And when I say that, I always think, God, that's really patronizing. But it is brave, because people don't want to talk about it because they're scared.
I'm trying to make a point of it now as well. So it's taking a while to get help with this anxiety thing. And I keep saying that I wish there had been a mum out there that shared her real honest experience, so that I could see someone else literally falling apart and be like, representation, it's okay. They're having these thoughts, but they're still being a good mum, and they're still doing the thing. So I have actually made an Instagram account. It's very empty at the moment. There's only 6 posts on there, but it is called And Then I Cried. It's got various underscores in different places, but if you type it in, you probably find me. And I will, every time I have a thought, there's been too many bad thoughts to chronologically go back through and post about it. So I'm not going to do that, because I don't have the time, as you can imagine. But as and when I have these thoughts of anxiety, or something happens, or there's a funny moment, I will be posting, basically. And the hope is that it gives me a way to process the fact and come to terms with the fact that I'm a mum now, which is still weird to me, but I am. But it might help another mum go, hey, look, this is normal. And obviously, my DMs are open. If anyone ever wants to talk to someone who gets it, I will talk to anyone. It doesn't matter who they are. And I'm not going to be that posting on Instagram worthy, glorious mother. I'm just going to be this is life, and sometimes it's crap. And I think I needed that, and I hope it helps somebody else.